Now in our 26th year, more than a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1361 with a release and air date of Saturday, March 29, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
Presented on the amateur radio bands all around the world, podcasting on the internet since 1993, and on low-power FM broadcast stations nationwide, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1361 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The ARR Ham Radio Open House is coming up soon, and the league has 5 suggested steps for success. The United States Navy is looking to amateur radio technology for backup communications. Young amateurs are urged to sign up now for the ARRL Youth Rally at the upcoming Dayton Hamvention. Amateurs in Puerto Rico have a successful emergency practice exercise using a simulated tsunami. The U.S. government shuts down the Voice of America and other shortwave news services as, quote, unnecessary. WABC Radio starts promoting AM radio in published advertising throughout New York City. There is a new 2-hour interview with the league CEO David Minster, NA2AA, conducted by our own Bill Salyers, AJ8B. The 52nd anniversary of the Geritol Net will be held in early April. Democrats in Congress file a bill to prohibit the FCC from canceling licenses. Africa's radio regulator considers expanding amateur radio. NASA has announced that we have recently passed solar maximum. Is a second peak coming? We will have the answer. And, hello Moon? Anybody home? Now that there is cell service on the Moon, nobody is answering. We will have the story for you in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, Phi K6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will present an article he calls Echoes from the Past. 150 microseconds ago. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week will take us back to the mid-1920s, where we find that for amateurs, crossing the Atlantic was the next natural challenge. They had been thinking about it since before the war. Many in the scientific community were skeptical that such a feat could possibly be achieved at such a short wavelength as 200 meters, especially with power as low as 1 kilowatt. This week's episode is called Crossings, Part 1, Aquitania. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Salyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air. Right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio in New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau here in Naugatuck, Connecticut, where the strangest weather setup I've ever seen is set up for today. Temperatures in the 70s here, but just an hour and a half away up at my parents' house in northern Massachusetts, it'll be in the 30s today. Good Lord. I'm Steve Sawyer, K1FRC.
Reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting this week from my home QTH in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Reporting from our news bureau here in sunny Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
Reporting from our news bureau in Lebanon, Tennessee, enjoying yet another 80-degree day, I'm Al Shephard, WK8W.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where the dogwoods are blooming, but yet there is still snow on the peaks of the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where spring has sprung and the grass is riz, I wonder where the flowers is. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, looking forward to the Green Country Ham Fest.
We are only days away from April and the ARRL's month-long ham radio open house. Radio clubs, schools, and other groups that operate a shared ham radio station are urged to join the nationwide event to raise the visibility of amateur radio and related technology. April is also Science Citizen Month, and April 18th is World Amateur Radio Day. It's also the 100th anniversary of the International Amateur Radio Union, making the month a perfect backdrop for engaging the public in an introduction to ham radio. You may know the experience when a newcomer visits your amateur radio station. They have a bit of overwhelmed amazement, taken aback by all the new sights and sounds. You explain to them what each technology is in front of them, and, the gear, the displays filled with radio signal waterfalls and other graphical interfaces, and the variety of sounds from Morse code and digital to the voices of faraway people. Look out the window and eyes are gazed on antennas of all shapes and sizes. And in the best of situations, that sensory overload turns into getting on the air, turns into a new member of this hobby of hobbies, turns into a new radio amateur. And that's the energy that we're tapping into for ARRL Ham Radio Open House. Show off all the cool things that can be done in amateur radio, leading with our technological innovations, how radio works, and what we can do with our signals. Follow up with getting the visitor hands-on. Let them participate in several of the 1 million acts of science that SciStarter is working to document as part of April being Citizen Science Month, that is. Get the visitor on the air. Make them feel part of it from the moment they walk in. With more details on the upcoming open house and the recommended steps you should follow, we go to our own Denny Haight, NZ8D.
The ARRL wants your club to be successful. Here are the steps to prepare for your club's ARRL Ham Radio Open House. First, pick a date. Select a date or dates any time in the month of April to host your club's station's open house to maximize visitor traffic to your operation. Next, use the media kit. ARRL has created a comprehensive media kit prepared by veteran public relations professionals on the ARRL Public Relations Committee. These pros want to help you shine and have given you a turnkey solution. Use as much or as little of it as you would like, but it's all there. The kit includes sample press releases, a public relations tip sheet, media outreach timeline, and more. Find it on the League's webpage. And don't forget its location, location, location. The ARRL Ham Radio Open House Locator tool is also available online. It is a two-way street. Add your club's information to the interactive tool or use it to find an activation already planned in your area. This is the same tool many are accustomed to using to find ARRL field day sites. Also take the opportunity to be a social media superstar. Social media is how many people find activities. Make sure your club is using the power of this outreach tool to spread the word of your event. In the Ham Radio Open House Media Kit, you'll find a section devoted to social media best practices. And finally, be ready for the next steps. You've planned for weeks. Visitors are showing up in droves. They are having a great time getting on the air. Don't leave them wondering what's next. Have a plan to get back in touch with them and welcome them to your next club meeting. Prepare a licensing class to enable them to dive right into becoming a ham. Let them know about your club's ARRL field day plans and have them be a part of them. The majority of active hams are ARRL members, so let your visitors know the value you get from an ARRL membership and encourage them to join. Don't forget about the free student membership for those aged 21 and under.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Amateur radio has provided the inspiration for a new initiative within the Resilient Communications Program at the U.S. Naval Undersea Warfare Center Division in the state of Washington. Organizers in Keyport, Washington are working to use ham radio's reliability as the backup for its emergency communications when there are disruptions to the Internet, computer function, or mobile phone services. Eric Seeley, the division's Director of Innovation in Keyport, said the program embraces the technology of ham radio for this purpose and will be establishing a network of licensed hams to make use of amateur radio frequencies when the need arises. Organizers have also been encouraging nearby naval bases to join in their effort. The Keyport team is reaching beyond the military, too. Everyone needs an Elmer, so organizers have contacted local ham radio clubs as well as emergency responders to help with training the new operators to grow the network. Some members of the team have already obtained their GMRS license for general mobile radio service, but acknowledge that the next step is the FCC's technician test to become a ham.
Registration is now open for the ARRL Youth Rally at Dayton Hamvention. For more details on the Youth Rally, we go to our field reporter, John Ross, KD8IDJ.
This amazing event is set to be a great day, full of hands-on radio activities for people aged 11 to 21. Join fellow young people who are interested in ham radio, led by volunteers from the ARRL Collegiate Amateur Radio Program, as they make a fun day out of getting to know radio and getting to know each other. There will be an on-air sprint, contacts with a parachute mobile station, and a kit build in the youth lounge, and a fox hunt. While Hamvention offers free tickets for youth aged 12 through high school, advanced registration for the Youth Rally is recommended, though. The Youth Rally registration fee is $20, and it includes a T-shirt to wear on Saturday, a badge, a lanyard, and a reusable tote bag. The event is led by ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. Young people are empowered to take leading roles in the hobby by participating in the ARRL Youth Rally. In 2024, then 6th grader Cameron Frey, KD9VGV, talked about his success as a Parks on the Air operator. I've done more than 100 central activations and more than 40 different parks. I've also hunted more than 700 different parks, he said. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The ARRL Youth Rally is also a day full of smiles, fun, and empowerment. Make sure your young ham joins us in Dayton.
Voice of America, a shortwave service launched in 1942 during the Second World War to bring news to countries under authoritarian control, is among U.S.-based news programming for overseas audiences targeted in a deep cut by the Trump administration. According to various media reports, VOA employees have been notified that they were all being placed on paid administrative leave with full benefits effective immediately. Cuts to Voice of America, as well as Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, Radio Marty, and others are the result of reductions taking place inside the United States Agency for Global Media, where these programs originate. These cuts are part of the ongoing downsizing of the U.S. government. The agency operates with congressional funding to deliver news in 64 languages to listeners around the world via 6 networks, some of which were created during the Cold War. VOA's first broadcast, made in 1942, was in German and was transmitted to German listeners to counter Nazi propaganda. The Agency for Global Media's mission statement reads, "To inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy." On Friday, March 15th, Trump signed the executive order for the cuts, noting in the language of the order itself that the services earmarked for reduction have been deemed unnecessary.
FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is opening a new docket, in re delete, seeking comment on every rule, regulation, or guidance document that the FCC should eliminate for the purposes of alleviating unnecessary regulatory burdens. Among the criteria that Carr is seeking comments on are cost-benefit considerations, experience gained from the implementation of the rule, marketplace and technological changes, regulation as barrier to entry, changes in the broader regulatory context, changes in or other implications of the governing legal framework, and other considerations relevant to the retrospective review of Commission rules. Carr stated, under President Trump's leadership, the administration is unleashing a new wave of economic opportunity by ending the regulatory onslaught from Washington. For too long, administrative agencies have added new regulatory requirements in excess of their authority or kept lawful regulations in place long after their shelf life had expired. This only creates headwinds and slows down our country's innovators, entrepreneurs, and small businesses. The FCC is committed to ending all of the rules and regulations that are no longer necessary, and we welcome the public's participation and feedback throughout this process. The American people expect and deserve a government that will efficiently deliver great results. We are committed to doing exactly that at the FCC, Chairman Carr added. The Communications Act directs the FCC to regularly review its rules to identify and eliminate those that are unnecessary in light of current circumstances, recognizing that in addition to imposing unnecessary burdens, unnecessary rules may stand in the way of deployment, expansion, competition, and technological innovation in communications that the Commission is directed to advance. Government-wide administrative law requires review of rules to ensure that unnecessary or affirmatively detrimental rules are not retained. We encourage commenters to consider certain policy factors, as described below, and consistent with standards and objectives set forth in recent presidential orders, as well as statutory and regulatory retrospective review standards. We also invite more general comment on rules that should be considered for elimination on other grounds. Submissions should identify with as much detail and specificity as possible the rule or rules that the commenting party believes should be repealed or modified, and the rationale for their recommended action. Commenters whose comments raise issues related to other open commission dockets should file their comments in all relevant dockets.
In a public notice titled RE Delete, 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 issued on March 12, 2025, the FCC is soliciting public input on any FCC rules in any service that members of the public believe should be deleted or modified for the purpose of alleviating unnecessary regulatory burdens. This is the latest in a series of similar proceedings going back to 1996, when the Communications Act was amended to require the FCC to periodically review its rules. ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, through its Executive Committee and FCC Council, is conducting a review of the provisions in Part 97 and other related rules that apply to radio amateurs. The ARRL is also soliciting feedback from its members. Rules identified as outmoded, obsolete, or that for the other reasons should be repealed or modified will be included in the ARRL's filing to be submitted no later than the FCC deadline of April 11, 2025. All filings must reference docket number 25-133. The deadline for filing reply comments is April 28, 2025. It is expected that the Commission will incorporate suggestions that it decided worthy of its consideration in a future notice of proposed rulemaking that could be issued later this year. There will then be an opportunity for public comment on the specific rules that the Commission proposes for deletion or modification. A PDF of the FCC public notice is available on the Commission webpage.
Radio World is reporting that Democrats have introduced legislation to prohibit the FCC from revoking broadcast licenses or taking action against companies based on viewpoints aired on their stations. The Broadcast Freedom and Independence Act states that the Commission is an independent agency and must not use its authority to execute politically motivated attacks. Democrats are worried that the Commission under Chairman Brendan Carr could target specific broadcasters based on the views they express. The three senators wrote to Carr and Commissioner Nathan Symington last month, saying that Republicans on the FCC appear to be opening or reopening investigations into broadcast companies without evidence of wrongdoing in what appears to be an attempt to intimidate broadcasters. The new bill would seem to have no realistic chance of passage, however, given that Republicans control both chambers of Congress and that the bill would have to be signed by President Trump to become law. It is, however, an effort by Democrats to amplify their concerns over the current direction of the FCC.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
At the 6th meeting of the African Telecommunications Union Task Group on Spectrum Recommendations held last week, a paper proposing the ATU promoting the development of amateur radio on the African continent was presented. The paper highlights that amateur radio is a vital resource for personal development, technological innovation, emergency response, and global cultural exchange. In Africa, it holds untapped potential to bridge communications gaps, especially in emergency and disaster situations, support drive technology enhancements, and equip individuals, especially youth, with critical technical skills. However, despite its numerous benefits, amateur radio remains underutilized across the continent due to an enabling and legal environment, limited infrastructure, and low public awareness. Addressing these barriers could unlock significant opportunities for growth, empowerment, and connectivity. With 37 International Amateur Radio Union member societies and approximately 3,000 licensed radio amateurs in Africa, this recommendation underscores the urgent need for a unified approach to promoting amateur radio in Africa. The recommendations emphasize regulatory reform, infrastructure enhancements for emergency response, capacity building, public awareness, and youth engagement. By adopting and implementing these strategies and recommending actions, the ATU and its partners would leverage amateur radio as a powerful tool for sustaining development, technical capacity building, and regional connectivity, particularly during times of disaster when reliable communication is crucial. During the discussion, delegates asked that countries that have a well-established amateur radio service share their experience. Both Egypt and South Africa indicated that they would share their experiences before the next meeting.
Amateur radio operators in Puerto Rico participated in the Caribe Wave 2025 tsunami exercise on March 20th. The event is an annual tsunami exercise designed to validate and advance tsunami preparedness efforts in the Caribbean and adjacent regions. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations, the International Tsunami Information Center, served as exercise coordinators. In Puerto Rico, the exercise was coordinated by the Puerto Rico Seismic Network in conjunction with NOAA and the Puerto Rico Emergency Management Bureau. Prior to the event, a meeting was held between the Puerto Rico Seismic Network representatives, ARRL Section Emergency Coordinator Emmanuel Cruz, NP4D, and regional emergency coordinators to delineate a plan to disseminate all messages directly by PRSN personnel to the local amateur radio packet BBS systems and then retransmit them via voice on all radio services including GMRS, FRS, MURS, CB, and amateur radio. The scenario chosen for Caribe Wave 2025 was a tsunami generated by a magnitude 8.5 earthquake located approximately 168 miles off the coast of Portugal, with the expected tsunami wave arriving 8 hours later. The exercise started at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, with an alert on radio and TV stations made by the Emergency Alert System. Some cell phone companies also sent the tsunami alert, and all systems stated very clearly that it was a test. As the Puerto Rico Seismic Network began to receive the tsunami alert bulletins sent through the KP4NTS and KP4DOG packet nodes, the information was sent to different coordinated amateur radio frequencies for emergency events on VHF, 40 meters, and 5,403.5 kilohertz island-wide. ARRL Puerto Rico Section Manager Carmen Green, KP4QBQ, was stationed at the Zone 5 PREMB office in Mayagüez to follow how the bulletins were sent through various amateur radio outlets. The exercise for the amateur radio part concluded at 1 p.m. Siren systems were also tested, evacuation drills were practiced in coastal cities, and some amateur radio groups formed special nets to gather information on how they received the advisory alert. For more information on the Caribe Wave exercises, visit www.tsunamizone.org.
Get ready for 2025 ARRL Field Day, June 28th and 29th. This year's theme is Radio Connects. Get all the resources to start preparing for your participation at the League website, where you can order t-shirts and other official gear. The June issue of QST magazine will include a special section with additional advice and tips for Field Day, sponsored this year by LDG Electronics. The digital edition of June QST will be available on May 2nd, 2025.
A 2-hour interview with ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, is available on the DX Mentor podcast hosted by Bill Sailors, AJ8B. Minster talked about a wide range of topics, from how he got started in amateur radio as a shortwave listener to the importance of mentoring new licensees. He also answered many questions from sailors about ARRL membership, matters involving the board of directors, and last year's cyber attack, which disrupted many systems and services. Minster also talked about the organization's work promoting and protecting amateur radio in Washington, D.C., and the ARRL's new strategy to develop the next generation of hams and to inspire youth. The DX Mentor can be found on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube.
Last October, NOAA and NASA announced that SolarMax has arrived. Only half the sun got the memo. The majority of solar activity has been happening in just one of the sun's hemispheres, the south. The solar superstorm of May 10, 2024, for instance, was caused by a monster southern sunspot. It makes you wonder, is the other half of SolarMax still coming? For forecasters of the solar cycle, this raises an interesting possibility. Maybe the northern peak is still coming. Indeed, there are signs in February 2025 that the pendulum is swinging. This current month, March, sunspots have been more evenly distributed between the two hemispheres, a sign that activity may be shifting north. This discussion focuses attention on the north-south balance of sunspots. A northern shift in the months ahead could herald a second peak and another year or two of excellent auroras before Solar Cycle 25 finally peters out.
The fight to keep AM radio as a mandatory service in new cars, including electric vehicles, is alive and well in New York City. One historic AM station in Manhattan has taken matters into its own hands to advocate for the senior band. A full-page advertisement by 77 WABC Radio was run in the New York Post, urging customers to only buy cars that come equipped with AM radio. The ad touts AM's importance, stating that the Federal Emergency Management Agency relies on this service to reach 95% of Americans during emergency situations, a well-known argument in favor of the proposed AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. Speaking to car manufacturers that have plans to drop AM as a service, it explicitly says don't support companies that don't care about your safety in a time of need. You should know the companies that don't put you and your loved ones' safety first.
The Geritol Net's 52nd anniversary will be held April 6th through the 13th of 2025. Special event station W1G will operate on 3.668 MHz each evening starting at 0100 UTC. In addition, W1G will be operating from the West Coast at 0300 UTC, also on 3.668 MHz. Officially, the Geritol, standing for the Greeting Extra Air Radio Amateurs Tired of Operating Lately Net, is a worked all states net, and all contacts must be made in the extra-class portion of the 80-meter band. All extra-class operators are invited to participate, and there will be a certificate and QSL card available. For more information, visit geritol.net on the Internet.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. If you're watching this on YouTube, the text of this will be included in the show notes so you can get all the details. The CQ Worldwide WPX single sideband contest occurs this weekend. Depending on when you are listening to this, it may be over, but there's still an opportunity for you. I'd kind of forgotten about these tips, but during a presentation that I recently gave entitled Chasing DX During a Contest, several of these coaching points came back to me, and I'd like to share them with you. If you were going to operate from a DX location such as Turks and Caicos Islands or Andorra, would you fly in the day of the contest and fly out on the Monday after? Most likely not. Many contesters will arrive days early to make sure that the equipment is operational, logistics were set up, and the jet lag was dealt with. They would also not leave Monday morning as they have logs to deal with, equipment teardown, QSLs, and other logistics to handle. The point is this. They will most likely be on the air days before and days after the contest, and they typically are on modes that they may not use during the contest and may be on the work bands as well, since those are not valid for contacts in the contest. Don't forget that these time periods are available to get some band slots. I'm also reminded of DXers like 9J2BO. Brian in Zambia, he likes to work the different mode during a contest. So for instance, during the WPX single sideband contest, I fully expect to see him on 17 meters or 12 meters CW. It's less people that are having pileups, and it gives him a chance to kind of really work a lot of different people. So don't forget those bands. I am trying to focus on those entities that will be available in the next week. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next 7 days might be helpful. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the Hounds DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Several have, and they've been very impressed with what they've received, so don't hesitate, just give it a try. Here's what should be on in the coming week. Let me know how many of these you get to work. Depending upon when you're listening to this could be over. I did give you a week's notice starting last week, but it's well worth checking out. If not, it's a great chance to get a semi-rare all-time new one or a band slot. A group of operators from Azerbaijan are planning a DXpedition to the rare location of Kizi Mountain as 4 Kilo Oscar Tango on March 29th and 30th. Activity will be on single sideband and FT8 80 through 10 meters. The QSL route will be Logbook of the World, EQSL, and then via 4K0 Tango. A group of hams from the Czech Republic are currently QRV as 3 Baker 9 Delta Juliet until April 5th. They plan to be on 160 through 10 meter CW, sideband, and FT8. QSL via OK6DJ and Logbook of the World. And I've heard these guys on a lot, but conditions have not been great, so I've not been able to get them. But I'm going to work at it. A very famous Polish operator, Janusz SP9FIH, has begun his FJ/SP9FIH operation from St. Bart's. Although he is not an avid FT8 user, he will operate this mode due to high community demand. During the first 4 days of his FJ operation, he will use Foxhound and MSHV. Interested parties should learn how to operate SuperFox as well. Janusz often prefers sideband, his favorite mode, despite his hearing difficulties. He has received LOTW certificates for both call signs. VK2YUS Chris will be QRV as YJ0CA from Port Villa until April 3rd, including participation in the CQ Worldwide WPX contest single sideband as a single operator entity. He will be using an ICOM IC7300 and a small amplifier with simple wire antennas and verticals on 40 through 10 meters. Operating hours are expected to be mostly between 2100 UTC and 1000 UTC due to local nighttime noise levels. He does not use any electronic logging or QSL systems, but maintains paper logbooks and provides high-quality physical QSL cards for confirmation. QSL cards for requested confirmation of contacts will be dispatched by airmail in April from Australia. ZC4, which is the UK sovereign base areas on Cyprus, is a rare one, and it was a rare one for me for a long time. I still need it on many bands. ZC4, operated by G4WXJ Dave, is planning his next holiday there from the SBA Cyprus, which is grid locator KM64US, as ZC4RH from April 6th to the 11th, so next week. He'll be running 100 watts into dipoles and an EdFed half wave. His activity will be on 7 meters through 6 meters on CW, sideband, FT8, and FT4. Watch that one. If you can get him, because it doesn't happen very often. Paul, Golf Whiskey Zero NGA, will be from Jamestown, St. Helena, as ZD7PG, April 12th to the 19th. Not on the air every day, he says, because he is looking forward to relaxing on this beautiful island. He says he will still have plenty of time on the air and will sort out QSLing when he's back in the UK. Not active on EQSL or Logbook of the World, he likes real paper QSL cards, but might knock out some EQSL if asked. K4HYD, Austin plans to operate K4HYD stroke C6 Alpha, the Retreat National Garden in the Bahamas on April 10th on FT8 and or CW. And that retreat is Parks on the Air BS-0025. Flavio, Italy Whiskey 2 November Echo Fox, is active on an HF holiday style from Filithio Island in the Maldives as AQ7EF, April 2nd through the 10th. You can QSL him via his home call or HE9ERA or Club Log OQRS. There are 2 opportunities for you to get V7, the Marshall Islands, in the log. The first is Tim, KZ4 Victor. He is in the Marshall Islands through April 20th for a scientific mission. As V73MT, he will be on Majoro, Majati, Inawatek, and Bikini Islands, and will be on the air mainly on 40, 20, and 17 sideband and FT8 at various, quote, unpredictable times. He will also operate aboard his boat. QSL through QRZ.com, Club Log, and LOTW. And make sure you know where he is when he operates, because if he's in his boat, it probably won't count. So make sure you know. KX4 Quebec Delta, Randall, is returning to the Marshall Islands for his second tour from now until 2027. He will be on Kwajalein Island in the Kwajalein Atoll and will use the call sign V73HW. He expects to be on 80 through 6 meter sideband and FT8 using an ICOM IC7300s at 100 watts into an inverted V. The most recent DX Mentor YouTube episode is an interview with David Minster, NA2AA, the CEO of the ARRL. David discusses his amateur radio journey as well as serious issues that are facing the ARRL. I have gotten tremendous feedback on this, so give it a listen and let me know what you think. And you can find that by searching in YouTube or your favorite podcast for the DX Mentor. You can also check out the DX Mentor Facebook page to keep tabs on what is current and what is coming. I know that the ARRL contest sheet is read elsewhere in this podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or to get entities or zones in the log that may otherwise be difficult to get. So here are some details on my favorite contest, the 2025 CQ Worldwide WPX contest, and there's 2 of them. The sideband weekend is coming up, March 29th and 30th, and CW is May 24th to 25th. It's very possible when you hear this it'll be over, but I'm hoping you can catch a little action. The contest starts at 0 Zulu Saturday and ends at 23:59 Zulu on Sunday. From the CQWW WPX website, I found this exclamation, quote, "Thrill in the chase of thousands of unique call sign prefixes from hundreds of DX entities in the world's largest Everyone Works Everyone radio contests. The CQ Worldwide WPX contests are immensely popular operating activities that enjoy broad participation by amateurs around the globe. The events attract amateurs at all levels of proficiency from beginner to world champion. WPX features a diversity of categories for single-op and multi-op stations, including the youth overlay for entrants 25 years of age or younger, so please come and join us and have fun. Here are the basics of the contest. Amateurs worldwide try to contact as many other amateurs and prefixes as possible during the period of operation. Single operator stations may operate 36 of the 48 hours and oftentimes must be a minimum of 60 minutes during which no QSO can be logged. Multi-operator stations may operate for the full 24 hours. Contacts are valid on all the standard bands, but not the work bands. With a call like AJ8B, you can see why I really like these WPX contests. If you need more details, you can email me or you can check out the CQ Worldwide WPX contest. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-whale Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great week.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 32nd segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the preparation of these segments. Now, sit back and enjoy this chapter of Ham Radio History. Crossings 1, Aquitania. Marconi had first done it back in 1901. For amateurs, crossing the Atlantic was the next natural challenge. They had been thinking about it since before the war. Many in the scientific community were skeptical that such a feat could possibly be achieved at such a short wavelength as 200 meters, especially with power as low as 1 kilowatt. An early rumor that American signals had been received in Europe appeared in the press in December 1920. The new record, the story went, may have been set on 6 October when signals from 2QR, a 100-watt station operated by brothers Harold and Hugh Robinson of Keyport, New Jersey, were reportedly received by George Benzie and James Miller in Aberdeen, Scotland, who claimed they had heard phonograph musical selections. But after a year-long investigation, that was still going on during both sets of transatlantic tests. A committee of the RCA concluded that it had not in fact occurred. The group did not question the Robinsons' motives, believing that they had given Benzie's letter in which he had claimed reception to the press in good faith. As it turned out, 2QR was not transmitting when Benzie claimed to have heard it, and the Robinsons agreed. In February 1921, the first, though unsuccessful, transatlantic attempt involved 25 U.S. stations transmitting and over 250 British amateurs enrolled as receiving entrants. The test had been originally proposed and planned in 1920 by M.B. Sleeper, the radio editor of Everyday Engineering. But after the magazine ceased publication later that year, Sleeper asked ARRL to take over the operation. With little time left to fully reconsider how to run it, the ARRL operating department stepped in. Coded messages, which they called arbitrary signals, were assigned to the transmitting stations, and logged reception reports were compared for accuracy. Although many signals were heard but not copied, none could be conclusively shown to represent a completed reception. In the 20 years since Marconi's crossing, the criteria for what constituted a valid reception had become much more stringent. A single letter S would no longer suffice. After all, in Marconi's case, his station had been easy to identify since it was the only one on the air. While gratefully acknowledging the cooperation and enthusiasm of British hams, ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner attributed the failure to their outdated receiving equipment and an understandable lack of experience in DX work, both of which the Americans had developed only after years of patient struggle. With new equipment and expertise, he was confident of success next time. We would bet our new spring hat that if a good U.S. amateur with a more modern set and an Armstrong Super could be sent to England, reception of U.S. amateurs would straightaway become commonplace, wrote Warner. The bet would eagerly be taken up and doubled down. After considering other deficiencies that might have contributed to failure in the first test, the organizers developed improved procedures. A second attempt would take place on the evenings of 8 through 17 December. The new plan would give each transmitter a fair chance to accomplish this almost unbelievable feat. To be eligible to participate in the test, a station would first have to be shown capable of reaching 1,000 miles by doing so in an overland qualifying test in November. Philip R. Corsi, assistant editor of the Radio Review in London and operator of 2JK, British, was in charge of all receiving operations and would determine the winners after reports had been received. Corsi had also officiated in the previous unsuccessful tests in February. The announcement in QST referred to the event as a contest, maybe the first DX contest, albeit one in which all contacts were one way only. Late 1921 was a particularly busy period. In the midst of the phone boom and plans for the transatlantic tests, the ARRL held its first national convention in Chicago from 31 August through 3 September, including the biggest banquet ever held in the history of amateur radio. October QST's coverage filled more than 14 pages. Its cover boasted that all districts were represented and featured a picture of a group to prove it. Well organized and attended, the convention had been 2 big hotels full of bugs chewing the sock until break of dawn every morning. A message arrived at the convention from U.S. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover. The man who would be elected president 7 years later referred to his department as the patron saint of amateur wireless operators and called amateur radio a very important movement. The message arrived via radiogram, of course. Maxim, in his opening address, reflected on the historic nature of the first convention and how far amateurs had come in organizing since those first days in Hartford. He predicted that nothing could stop relaying from going worldwide, and in a thinly veiled political statement envisioned a day when private citizens may communicate without cost from the shores of the great far-flung Pacific on the west to the limits of civilized cooperation and good government on Europe's east. An evening session featured many well-known speakers, including DeForest, Armstrong, A.H. Taylor, L.M. Clausing, and R.F. Bowen, along with Frank Conrad of 8XK radio telephone frame. CW was the hottest topic of the technical sessions, and a CW night was devoted to that mode entirely. Professor C.M. Jansky of the University of Minnesota presented a paper on the superiority of CW to Spark by comparing operating experiences. He was the father of Carl G. Jansky, discoverer of radio waves from the Milky Way and a founding father of radio astronomy. A unit of signal strength as flux density is named after him. Not everyone had been convinced, however, and Warner read 2 letters from Speedo Vermilia, 1ZE, about Spark's superiority. The debate continued. The only consensus was that the coming season of on-air work would likely decide the matter. The ARRL Board of Directors met to discuss the transatlantic test and decided unanimously to appropriate funds to send a U.S. ham to England to ensure success. Paul Foreman Godley grew up in Kansas and spent his late teen years working as a telegraph operator for railroads and other companies. Enthralled with wireless at a young age, he read whatever material he could find about it, such as articles in Scientific American. In 1908, at age 19, he managed at last to become involved in wireless at a commercial firm in Chicago. Impressed with his enthusiasm and expertise, his superiors put him in charge of the United Wireless Station in Grand Rapids before he turned 20. Over the next 4 years, he found himself in a whirlwind of wireless work. A student at the University of Illinois, installing equipment and designing courses on wireless in Texas, on assignment as wire chief of the post office in New York, and on the Amazon River helping to develop a radio service for the Brazilian government. Finally settling in New Jersey in the summer of 1914, he built a station, 2ZE, broke all distance records with it, and designed a new regenerative receiver that became very popular among amateurs. Presenting his designs to the RCA and publishing them in QST, he was widely credited with being the first to adapt the Armstrong regenerative circuit to shortwave amateur use. As an engineer at the Adams Morgan Company, he developed their Paragon line of receivers based on this design, and later at the Marconi Company, he designed military receiving equipment for use during the war. In 1918, he married, started a family, and later started his own company in Montclair. By late 1921, Godley, now 32, was a senior member of the radio establishment, both amateur and professional, and widely recognized as an expert in shortwave reception, one of an elite few. Therefore, it would be Paragon Paul whom the ARRL would dispatch to England to anchor the receiving end of the next transatlantic tests. This might also be considered the first de-expedition. A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Godley would be sent specifically to supplement the British efforts with American expertise using American apparatus. Judged by the ARRL board as America's best authority and best operator in shortwave receiving, he would sail to England aboard the Aquitania on 15 November to prepare for the December operation. Meanwhile, he would be building and selecting the best equipment he could find to cover the short waves. It wasn't that the British hams were not up to the task, as had been suggested by a French magazine. After all, it was England to which the American and Canadian hams had looked for early supplies of vacuum tubes after the war. But, as QST amusingly put it, the British are not such boiled owls as we North American hams, and do not, as a class, relish staying up to all hours. And since the ARRL would never be so impolite as to ask them to do so, it was at first thought that the transmitting schedules would have to be limited. But the sending of an American amateur changes this, so that not only will the special stations have individual schedules, but everybody else can enter who will. Perhaps the most important change from the February attempt was that in addition to scheduled operations of the more powerful qualifying stations, everyone else was invited to join in too. The organizers explicitly wanted this test to be a free-for-all in which everybody can participate. QST reminded readers that the proper direction to favor was northeast, since signals followed the Great Circle route. Therefore, those on the Atlantic coast would not necessarily have an advantage. The test would consist of 10 nights of 6-hour sessions from 7 through 16 December and run from 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. The free-for-all session would run from 7 until 9:30, when stations could transmit according to time slots assigned in 15-minute intervals assigned by district. Qualifying stations would then transmit for the second interval beginning at 9:30 according to a schedule of 15-minute periods, the sequence of which would be rotated each night. 2 or 3 stations shared each time slot and would transmit simultaneously. Each of the qualifying stations would transmit 5-letter coded messages called secret cipher combinations that were sealed in envelopes not to be opened until the tests began. The identities of the 27 stations were likewise kept secret and included 20 CW and 7 Spark transmitters. Among them were 1AW Maxim, 1ZE Vermilion, 6XH Stanford University, and 9ZN Matthews. ARRL Traffic Manager Schnell would send the schedule and station list to only Corsi and seal his own copy in the safe at ARRL headquarters. Godley, who would report through Corsi just as the other listeners would, only knew the free-for-all schedule as did the general public. Corsi would give him and all the other listeners information about schedules and wavelengths, but would keep the station identities and cipher groups secret. Crossings 1 Aquitania continues next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following. 2QR, heard in Scotland, QST, December 1920, page 21. 2QR's transatlantic claim disproved, QST, January 1922, page 8. Failure of the transatlantic tests, QST, May 1921, page 15. The Traffic Manager, Transatlantic Sending Tests, QST, September 1921, page 12. Our First National Convention, QST, October 1921, page 7. Godley to England to copy transatlantics, QST, October 1921, page 29. Paul F. Godley, De Godley Ray Transatlantics, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, October 1921, page 56. With our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his permission to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, to set up this chapter, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Repair work that a ham radio operator and fellow club members conducted on a shared repeater site in Washington State has cost the ham his government job. A Stoughton County official said that Russell Pellberg, KA7MPX, was not authorized to give the other members of the Hell's Gate Amateur Radio Club access to the secure site, and that their work caused a communication outage and a power meter disturbance for other users of the site. County agencies operate 2 nearby radio repeaters, and the local utility, Clearwater Power Company, also has facilities on the site. According to a report in the Lewiston Tribune, Pellberg said he had discussed the work with county commissioners and they appeared to be supportive. He told investigators that he had even written a resolution for the county to vote on, but there were delays producing the document. The newspaper report said he has apologized on behalf of the club for proceeding ahead of the necessary vote and that the hams meant no harm. No criminal charges were filed or recommended. Pellberg, who has worked in government for 35 years, was terminated from his job as the county public works director in late January.
Something that you don't generally expect as a North American-based radio enthusiast is to listen in on Russian military communications during their war in Ukraine via web SDR, or that these communications would be passing through U.S. military satellites that are happy to just broadcast anything. Yet that's the situation that the Save It for Parts YouTube channel recently described. As it turns out, there was a gaggle of UFOs up there, as the U.S. DoD calls them. Between 1979 and 1989, 8 Flight Satcom launches took place, with Flight Satcom 7 and 8 still operating today. They were later joined by their successor, UHF Follow-On, with 11 launches between 1993 and 2003. All these operate in the UHF spectrum, with some UFO satellites also covering other bands. Their goal is to provide communication for the military's forces, with these satellites for the most part acting as simple repeaters. Over time, non-military parties learn to use these satellites too, even if it's technically illegal in many jurisdictions. As described in the video, if you listen in on web SDR streams from Ukraine, you can find not only encrypted military communications, but also unencrypted Russian radio traffic. It seems that in lieu of being provided with proper encrypted radio systems, Russian forces are using these U.S. military satellites for communication, much like how U.S. and NATO forces would have. This is reminiscent of how Russian troops were caught using Discord via Starlink for communication before Russian command shut down Discord.
The United Nations General Assembly is designated April 2nd of every year as World Autism Awareness Day. Autism Awareness Week this year is March 28th through April 3rd, and World Autism Awareness Day 2025 is on Wednesday, April 2nd. Again this year, there will be a special amateur radio event with participation from around the world. This will be the event's 3rd year, and we're very happy to be growing each year, said James Gallo, KB2FMH, the event's coordinator. The time span this year for W2A and many other international calls is April 2nd through the 8th, and amateur operators will be on all bands from UHF to 160 meters using modes of their choice. We are still developing more participants, so the listings will be updated as we go, he added. If you want to volunteer as an operator for the W2A call, send an email to hamradioevents@gmail.com. For more information, visit the W2A QRZ page.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. As there is a new crew on board the ISS, it might be worth mentioning the frequencies you may use. Remember, during docking and spacewalks, the radio is turned off. There's the packet system on 145.825 MHz up and down. The crossband repeater is on 145.990 MHz up with a PL tone of 67, and the downlink is 437.800 MHz. If a crew member desires a QSO, they will turn up the volume and begin calling. There's no reason to try and call the crew if you do not hear them. The volume on the radio is normally off, and they will not hear anything. You are basically causing QRM for those that would like to use the repeater. Finally, should there be a school contact, the downlink where you can listen is 145.800 MHz worldwide. Of course, the uplink is an unpublished frequency, and you should not try to figure it out and disrupt the contact. Random contacts with the crew are a lot of fun and exciting. If you do happen to make a contact, they are all logged, and you should send for a QSL card. You will find directions at ariss.org under the General Contacts tab. You never know when an astronaut will be at a major hamfest or local function, and you might be able to get that card personally signed by them. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's solar weather and propagation forecast report. Solar activity reached moderate levels due to a large flare on March 26. A Type 2 radio emission was also observed on March 26. This is likely associated with a coronal mass ejection that is believed to be from beyond the southwest limb but, due to its location, is not considered to have an Earth-directed component. No additional Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed. The arrival of the coronal hole high-speed stream is expected to bring an influx of electrons to geostationary orbit through March 29. Strong solar winds, currently near 600 km per second, will compress the Van Allen belt, which will decrease the number of electrons observed by the NOAA satellite. As winds ease, the flux will rebound towards or above the 1000 solar proton flux unit threshold. The 10.7 cm radio flux for March 27 through March 29 is 160, and 165 for March 30 and 31. Radio blackouts reaching R1 levels were observed over the past 24 hours. The largest was on March 26 at 0809 UTC. The predicted sunspot number for the remainder of March is 132 with a high of 139 and a low of 132. On Saturday, March 29, a deep partial solar eclipse, the first of the year, will be visible across much of the northeastern United States and eastern Canada, as well as in northwestern Europe, northwestern Africa, and northern Russia, as the moon takes a bite out of the sun from our perspective on Earth. 13 states will have views of the sunrise solar eclipse, officially beginning at 4:50 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and ending just under 4 hours later, at 8:43 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Solar eclipse glasses are recommended to view the event. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service and read what the numbers mean. You will also find a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices. And be sure to check out the propagation page of Carl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
In radio sport this week, a lot of great contests. March 28th and 29th, it's the Sasquatch Stomp CW. March 29th and 30th, the CQWWWPX contest, single sideband, phone. April 2nd, the UKE ICC 80-meter contest, that's phone. April 3rd and 4th, Walk for the Bacon QRP contest, CW. April 3rd, the SARL 80-meter QSO party, that's phone. April 3rd, the NRAU 10-meter activity contest, that's CW, phone, and digital. For April 5th and 6th, there are 9 contests. The YBDXPI single sideband contest, that's phone. The EA RIDI contest, digital. The RSGB FT4 International Activity Day, FT4. The WARC Georgia State Parks on the Air, CW, phone, and digital. April 5th through the 6th, the Louisiana QSO Party, CW, phone, digital. The Mississippi QSO Party, CW, phone, and digital. Also, April 5th through the 6th, the VHF UHF Missouri QSO Party, CW, phone, and digital. April 5th and 6th, the Florida State Parks on the Air, CW Phone and Digital. And on April 5th and 6th, the SPDX contest, that is CW and Phone. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on March 29th, it's the Central Dakota Amateur Radio Club Hamfest, hosting the ARRL North Dakota State Convention, Bismarck, North Dakota there. April 5th is the RARS Fest, hosting the ARRL North Carolina State Convention, that's in Raleigh, North Carolina. And April 11th through the 12th, the Greene County Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Oklahoma State Convention, that's in Claremore, Oklahoma. And don't forget to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
Join DX enthusiasts from around the world as they gather for the 76th International DX Convention in Visalia, California. The popular event runs April 11th through the 13th, 2025. This ARRL convention will feature several days of exciting programming, forums, and seminars. It is sponsored by the Northern California DX Club. On Friday, April 11th, a full-day track of the Next Generation DXing program will feature the latest in how DXpedition leaders are planning missions. Using innovative technologies like radio in a box, providing data links in extreme and remote conditions, and building teams to deliver incredible numbers of contacts with hams around the world. ARRL representatives will be on hand for the event and to document some of the seminars on video for the ARRL HQ YouTube channel and the ARRL Learning Center. ARRL Southwestern Division Vice Director Ned Stearns, AA7A, is among the co-chairs who have organized the convention. There will be on-site DXCC card checking. An exhibit hall will let attendees visit with manufacturers and retailers of amateur radio gear. Other exciting learning opportunities include a Contest Academy and DX Academy. More information about the event, including registration and accommodations, can be found at www.dxconvention.com. Pre-registration rates are valid until April 3rd, 2025.
Jack Purdom, Ph.D., W8TEE, is the February 2025 QST Cover Plaque Award winner for his story, Solutions for Winding Toroids. ARRL Great Lakes Division Director Scott Yonley, N8SY, presented Purdom with the award on Friday, March 21st. Even though this was not his first cover plaque, he was still very excited and grateful in receiving it, almost as much as I was in being able to present it to him. It was an honor for sure, said Yonley. Purdom shared the November 2017 QST Cover Plaque Award with Ferric Zia, K2ZIA. Purdom received his novice license in 1954, upgraded to general in 1955, and has been continuously licensed ever since, and currently holds an amateur extra class license. He was vice president of the Milford Amateur Radio Club in Greater Cincinnati from 2016 to 2021.
Keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently, Glyn, Victor Kilo 6 Papa Alpha Whiskey and I had the opportunity to play radio. This isn't something that happens often, so we try to make the most of it. For our efforts, we had plenty of frustrations, to the point where we were joking that I should rename this to Frustrations of Amateur Radio. That was until we heard something weird on air. All set-up shenanigans forgotten, we marvelled at the experience. I was playing around on the 10-metre band, trying to hear people making noise and potentially our first contact for the field day we were participating in, when I heard something odd. 2 stations talking to each other, but the audio was strange. It was like they were doubling up. The same audio played a fraction of a second later. Until that moment, something I've only ever heard in a radio studio whilst editing using a reel-to-reel tape machine with separate recording and playback heads. Having just started using a digital-only radio, at first I thought this was an artifact of the radio. I took note of the frequency, 28.460 MHz, and told Glynn about it. After we moved the telescopic vertical antenna to the analog radio, we discovered that this was in fact real, not caused by the radios, no doubt a relief to the proud owner of both radios, Glynn, who was thinking more clearly than I. He took note of the call signs: Dom, Victor Kilo 2 Hotel Juliet, and Yukiharu, Juliet Echo 1 Charlie Sierra Whiskey. Looking back now, an audio recording would have been helpful. At the time, I suggested that this might be a case of long-path and short-path signals arriving at our station and being able to hear both. If you're not sure what that means, when you transmit, an antenna essentially radiates in all directions, and signals travel all over the globe. Some head directly towards your destination, the short path. Others head in exactly the opposite direction, taking the long way around Earth, the long path. You might think that the majority of contacts are made using the short path, but it regularly happens the other way around, where the long path is heard and the short path is not. As you might know, radio waves essentially bounce up and down between the ionosphere and Earth, and it might happen that the signal arrives at the destination antenna, or it might happen that it bounces right over the top, making either short path or long path heard, or not. In this case, both arrived clearly audible. It wasn't until I sat down on the couch afterwards with a calculator that I was able to at least prove to my own satisfaction that this is what we heard. So, what were those calculations and what was the delay? The circumference of Earth is roughly 40,000 kilometers. RF propagation travels at the speed of light, or about 300,000 kilometers per second. It takes about 0.13 seconds or 130 milliseconds for a radio signal to travel around Earth. At this point, you might realize that 40,000 kilometers is measured at the surface, but ionospheric propagation happens in the ionosphere, making the circumference at the very top of the ionosphere about 45,000 kilometers, which would take 150 milliseconds. There are several things that need to line up for this all to work. Propagation aside, the distance between all three stations needs to be such that the number of hops between each combination is a whole number, so we can all hear each other. As it happens, the distance between Perth in Western Australia and Maebashi City in Japan is pretty close to the distance between Goulburn in New South Wales and Japan, and the distance between Goulburn and Perth is roughly half that. Using back-of-napkin trigonometry, it appears that 27 hops around the planet are required to make this happen. That's 5 hops between Perth and Japan and between Goulburn and Japan, and 2 hops between Goulburn and Perth, and 27 hops between Perth and Japan the long way around. Given that the F2 layer, where the 10-meter signal is refracted, exists between about 220 kilometers and 800 kilometers, we can estimate that the total delay for the long path is at least 144 milliseconds. That doesn't really translate into anything you might relate to, but at 8 words per minute a Morse code DIT takes 150 milliseconds, which gives you a sense of how long the echo delay is. In other words, it's something that you can absolutely hear without needing to measure it. There are other implications. Whisper signals are used to test weak signal propagation. Stations around the globe report on what they can hear and when. For this to work, the signal needs to be synchronized, something which is commonly implemented using something called NTP, or Network Time Protocol. It can achieve a time accuracy of 10 milliseconds. GPS-locked whisper beacons can achieve an accuracy of 40 nanoseconds. In other words, if we know that the beacon and the receiver are time synchronized, we can probably detect if the signal arrived using a short path or a long path. The whisper decoder tracks the time between when the signal arrived and 2 seconds past an even minute, as perceived by the receiver. Gwyn, Golf 3 Zulu India Lima, wrote an interesting document called Timescale Whisper Daemon Database Queries version 2 on the subject of the data format used by Whisper Daemon, a tool used to analyze Whisper beacon transmissions. If this is something you want to play with, check out whisperdaemon.org. From our adventures, there was plenty to take away. Stay curious, go portable, take notes, practice putting up an antenna, keep a log, laugh and have fun, and last but not least, get on air and make noise. Before I forget, make sure your mate brings a pen for logging when your own trusty scribble stick suddenly gives up the ghost for no apparent reason. I knew there was a reason I preferred pencils. I'm Mono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Firefly's Blue Ghost lunar lander snapped a gorgeous photo of a solar eclipse from the moon in which Earth covers up most of the sun, leaving only the so-called diamond ring effect. The lander snapped the photo at around 0530 UTC on Friday, March 14th, as the Earth slowly blocked a view of the sun. The solar eclipse on the moon occurred at the same time as a total lunar eclipse here on Earth. Terrestrial viewers saw the lunar surface turn a red hue. The eclipse lasted for around 5 hours at the lunar landing site in Mare Crisium. Firefly released another image from the earlier part of the eclipse that shows the lander's solar panel as the sun starts to hide behind Earth's shadow. Firefly's Blue Ghost lander was launched on January 15th and successfully touched down on the moon on Sunday, March 2nd at around 0730 UTC. It landed upright with no issues, unlike the Intuitive Machines lander, which toppled over on landing on March 6th. This is Firefly's first mission to the moon, so Blue Ghost is packed with 10 NASA instruments designed to probe the lunar surface and gather data to hopefully support upcoming human missions to the natural satellite. This is all part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services initiative. Not long after sunset at the end of the lunar day on March 16, 2025, the lander's batteries were depleted, communications were lost, and the spacecraft's mission was officially declared ended at 23:25 UTC.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Astronaut and radio amateur Rabea Rog, Lima Bravo 9, November Juliet, /Kilo Delta 3, Alpha India Delta, will be transmitting amateur radio slow-scan TV images from space during the SpaceX FRAM-2 mission, planned for launch on March 31st. The FRAM-2 mission is set to become the first human spaceflight in polar orbit, flying over the North and South Poles. Named after the famous polar exploration ship Fram, which completed voyages to both Arctic and Antarctic, the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket will launch 4 astronauts from Europe and Australia into orbit for 3 to 5 days. During the FRAM-2 mission, Rabea Rog, Lima Bravo 9, November Juliet of Norway, and Kilo Delta 3, Alpha India Delta from the USA will be operating the onboard amateur radio system, sending SSTV images as part of a high school and university student competition. These SST images will also be available to be received by the general public during the mission. The International Space Station simulated the FRAM-2 SSTV mode PD-120 transmissions from February 13th to the 17th on 437.550 MHz FM to enable people to gain proficiency in receiving the signals before the mission. Fram to Ham is an experimental radio competition open to high school and university ages. ROG will send pictures of 3 geographical locations via an onboard ham radio, but here's the twist. They'll be cut into pieces and mixed up. Participants will receive only fragments of the locations and need to guess where on Earth they are and what their role in polar history was. While anyone can receive the pictures, forming an international team may help you solve the puzzle. There are several challenges like low transmit power, variations of antenna orientation, and a short 3-day mission duration, with only a limited time assigned for the SSTV operation. These challenges require operating proficiency and the use of the best attainable radio station, and this simulation shall give the possibility to exercise this. For more information on the FRAM-2 mission, and for youth organizations interested in participating in the Fram-to-Ham SSTV competition, visit framtoham.com.
It is time once again for AMSAT satellite shorts from all over, and we begin this week with a report on the increasing threat from space debris that calls for both higher maneuverability in orbit and a reduction of the amount of junk. British startup MagDrive claims it can help with both via a new propulsion system for spacecraft that will launch into space for the first time later this year and will be fueled by solid metal. The first incarnation of the MagDrive system, called Warlock, is set to launch into orbit in June 2025. It works by creating power using onboard solar panels to ionize metal. Once detonated, the metal is turned into extremely hot and dense plasma or electrically charged gas. For now, the system is not refuelable. In the more distant future, however, the system could obtain its fuel from existing space junk by harvesting dead satellites for metal to use as propellant. Up next comes word that in the next few months, from its perch atop a mountain in Chile, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory will begin surveying the cosmos with the largest camera ever built. But the rising number of satellites in orbit can be a problem for scientists because the satellites interfere with ground-based astronomical observations by creating bright streaks on images and electromagnetic interference with radio telescopes. Until recently, astronomers had no centralized reference for tracking satellites. Now, the International Astronomical Union has a virtual center for the protection of the dark and quiet sky from satellite constellation interference, which serves as an information hub. One of the center's tools, called SatChecker, draws on a public database of satellite orbits fed by information from observers and companies that track objects in space. Astronomers can use SatChecker to confirm what satellite is passing overhead during their observations. And finally this week, researchers have broken a distance record in quantum communication by sending a secret encryption key nearly 13,000 kilometers from China to South Africa using a cheap, lightweight microsatellite. The satellite was able to send pulses of laser light put into special quantum states from a rooftop in Beijing to another at Stellenbosch University near Cape Town. The pulses formed a quantum key that was used to encrypt two images, one of China's Great Wall and one showing part of Stellenbosch's campus. The feat, a kind of encryption known as quantum key distribution, is a step towards being able to send ultra-secure messages between any two locations, however distant.
GOTA, or Grids on the Air Activity and Awards Program, will offer new challenges to HF enthusiasts. Since March 1, 2025, a fortnight or so back, this initiative, endorsed by various major ham radio organizations, has been running as a challenge to shortwave operators at any level of skills and equipment to engage in the ultimate DX art of grid hunting. Grid hunting consists of chasing grid squares of the worldwide Maidenhead locator system, much like VHF and SHF enthusiasts have been doing for years. The difference with the new Grids on the Air program is its focus on promoting activity on HF bands and on phone NCW, as a similar program is already available for digital modes. GOTA aims to give ham operators, both experienced and possibly jaded, as well as newcomers and shortwave listeners, a reason to engage in satisfying hunting activity involving QSOs with stations from all worldwide squares, near or far, important or not.
The adventure promises to be twice as big for young amateurs participating in the Dave Calter Memorial Youth DX Adventure. The experience will happen in June and July of this year. There are 2 trips planned. The first trip takes a group of youngsters to one of the top contesting stations here in the U.S. The young hams will serve as a team operating a special event station W3Y from June 13 through the 15th, hosted by the K3LR Multi contest station in Pennsylvania. In July, other young participants will be going to Curaçao to another super contesting station to operate as PJ2Y. The program was being hosted for the fourth time by the Caribbean Contesting Consortium, PJ2T. This four-day activation will take place from the 17th through the 22nd of July. Be on the lookout for applications for both of these trips. In the meantime, you can visit the team page to get more information. The website is youthdxa.org. That's YOUTHDXA, all one word, .org. These adventures reflect the spirit and support given to the program by Dave Coulter, KB8OCP, the Youth Adventures co-founder. Dave became a silent key in November of 2013.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting, in conjunction with the Westchester Amateur Radio Association, announced expanded hours for the museum during the 2025 Hamvention. The museum will be open Thursday, May 15th, Friday, May 16th, and Saturday, May 17th, noon until 9 p.m., and on Sunday, May 18th, noon until 5. Admission is $10 at the door. Amateur radio station WC8VOA will be on the air to operate. The museum is just a short drive from Hamvention down either Interstate 75 or Route 42 from Xenia. The address is 8070 Tylersville Road, Westchester, Ohio. And the phone number, in case you need to give them a call, 513-777-0027.
The new Mobile Emergency Operations Center of the Manawatu District Council in New Zealand was years in the making. Recently unveiled to the public at Family Fun Day in Victoria Park, the EOC was a concept in administrators' minds for quite some time. They recognized that for a long time a transportable EOC was essential for civil defense emergencies in an area that has a large rural population. Until now, the district's urban-based EOC was all everyone had. The mobile EOC can be trailered from place to place and set up quickly, usually within a half an hour, and once in place, it can accommodate as many as 40 people and shield them from winds of well over 100 kilometers. When discussions began years ago, Cyclone Gabrielle was on people's minds. Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, which is also on the North Island, suffered terribly during the 2023 storm, but mobile coordination centers responded quickly there, creating a tent city for communications and other needs. The New Zealand Net newsletter quoted Mayor Helen Warboys, who praised the EOCs and the promise it brings in times of crisis. She said in times of emergency, every second counts, and having a mobile, highly equipped response unit like this will make tremendous difference in our ability to coordinate effectively and deploy resources quickly. As the newsletter editors also noted in their report, the new mobile EOC will be ideal for next year's field day operation.
Alba Orbital, made up of members from the UK, USA, and Germany, the world's leading pocket cube company, has now delivered 53 Pico satellites on orbit to date. These include 5 pocket cube satellites from 3 different companies, recently flown onboard SpaceX's Transporter 13 rideshare mission. The satellites were integrated into Alba Orbital's pocket cube deployer, AlbaPod, at their new facility in Hillington Industrial Estate, Glasgow, the world's first pocket cube factory. After integration, the cluster of pocket-sized satellites were shipped out to SpaceX and then hitched their ride to low Earth orbit. Pocket cubes are miniaturized satellites, typically 5 centimeters cubed per unit, that can be launched to orbit for as little as 25,000 euros via Alba Orbital's rideshare services. Pocket cubes are cost-effective, quicker to build, and provide versatile options for a variety of missions that range from educational projects to advanced technological demonstrations. HADES-ICM, a 1.5 Pico pocket cube, this smallest sat is carrying an open voice transponder for the radio amateur community. It will be operated by the nonprofit organization AMSAT-EA. The pocket cube includes the UK-based Smart IR's technology experiment that will be conducted on orbit, as well as an IC Mercury experiment. Inspiring space sustainability text messages that will be broadcast periodically by HADES-ICM.
The 73rd long-duration expedition to the International Space Station will begin with the departure of the Soyuz MS-26, expected to take place in April 2025. The Expedition 73 crew will consist of astronauts and cosmonauts just launched to the station aboard the SpaceX Crew Dragon Endurance, as well as those soon to follow aboard the Soyuz MS-27. The crew of MS-26 Russian cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin and Ivan Wagner and American astronaut Don Pettit, KD-5 are already making preparations for departure in the coming weeks. Scheduled for departure even sooner, probably in the coming week, is SpaceX Crew Dragon Freedom with two members of SpaceX Crew 9, astronaut Nikki Hague, KG-5 and cosmonaut Alexei Korbanov, accompanied by U.S. astronauts Barry Wilmore and Sunita Williams, KD-5 PLB. Wilmore and Williams were launched to the ISS in June of last year aboard the Boeing Starliner crew flight test. SpaceX Crew 10 consists of NASA astronaut Anne McClain, who will serve as Crew 10's commander. She is joined by Crew 10's pilot, NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, KG-5 GWI. Mission specialist, Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takeya Onoshi, K5 LKS, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. Crew 10 was launched from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on Friday, March 14th at 23:03 UTC after a scrub on Wednesday. The March 12th launch attempt was scrubbed due to an issue with the hydraulics on ground support systems on the launch pad. That crew will be joined later next month by the crew of Soyuz MS-27, which is scheduled to consist of cosmonaut Sergei Rizikov and Alexei Zurbitsky, as well as American astronaut Johnny Kim. Once the MS-26 crew departs, Takeya Onoshi of Japan will serve as the commander of Expedition 73, the third Japanese astronaut to take command of the station. Born in Narimi, Japan, Onishi earned an aeronautical and space engineering degree from the University of Tokyo and was co-pilot of Boeing 767 airplanes from 2003 to 2009. Onishi will fly to space for the second time on Crew 10, having previously flown to the ISS aboard Soyuz MS-01 in 2016 as part of an Expedition 48 and 49 crew. JAXA and NASA selected Onishi for NASA's 20th astronaut group in 2009. Expedition 73 will continue the extensive scientific research conducted aboard the ISS, focusing on various fields including biology, human physiology, physics, and material science. The crew members will also maintain and upgrade the space station systems.
And finally this week, if you've ever waited for a phone call that just never came, you might appreciate this story, especially if your caller happened to be on the moon. That much-awaited wireless call from the moon to the Earth will just have to be put on hold for now. Nokia's 4G LTE network was expected to be put through its paces from the south pole of the lunar surface following the March 6 landing of the Athena lander. Athena arrived with Nokia's network in a box on board, like its predecessor, Lander, also built by Intuitive Machines. The lander tipped over on arrival, and with its solar panels blocked from receiving the necessary recharge from the sun, the mission was quickly declared over. Undaunted, Nokia pointed out that the company did successfully deliver the moon's first cellular network and powered it up for 25 minutes to transmit data and receive commands from the Earth. Hopes were high, though, that there would be more to report. After all, this mission was supposed to help facilitate communications in 2027 aboard Artemis 3. That mission is to be NASA's first human spaceflight to the moon since 1972, and astronauts are expected to be wearing spacesuits that have integrated 4G LTE capabilities, courtesy of Nokia and Axiom Space. Of course, that's still 2 years away, so until then, hold all calls, please.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must Have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeaters across the country and around the world on great repeater systems like the VK7 RDR repeater on 439.775, also on digital amateur television on 445.500 on the VK7AX H.264 AT repeater serving Ulverstone in Australia, and also via relay on the VK3 RBO DVB-T HD amateur television repeater, also on 445.500 serving Bendigo, Victoria, Australia, and also on the VK3 CE members video stream. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.